Hi, I'm Marissa, and this is part 2 of a 2-part episode. So if you missed the first part, go watch it first. The link is in the description. To refresh, we are discussing 2 archaeological discoveries that are evidence that the writer of the Gospel of John was an eyewitness to 1st century Jerusalem. These places, now discovered by archaeologists, were mentioned in the Gospel of John only, and not in any of the other Gospels. And considering Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, this means the writer is indirectly proving to us his first-hand knowledge of 1st century Jerusalem. In the first part of this episode, I talked about the Pool of Bethesda. And now I want to discuss the second discovery, the Pool of Siloam, which you may remember from John chapter 9, where Jesus places mud on a man's eyes who had been blind from birth and tells him to wash it off in the Pool of Siloam, where he is then healed. For many years, scholars thought John was using a theological metaphor when he used the term Siloam in the Pool of Siloam. Honestly, this argument of past critical scholars baffles me. It seems so far-fetched, but when people are dead set to prove that the Gospels are myth, they'll use anything. Professor of Biblical Studies Paul Anderson explains the critical scholar's past argument. Since John mentions that the meaning of the word Siloam is translated sent in verse 7, quote, scholars have assumed that because this reference carried symbolic meaning, it was theological in its origin rather than historical. After all, the man becomes something of an apostle. An apostle is one who is sent with a commission. And this inference served as further evidence of John's theological interests at the expense of historical concern. This argument is about as thin as it gets to me. I mean, there are double meanings to what God or Jesus does all throughout Scripture. Here it's because in the previous chapter, John 8, while the unbelieving Jews are harassing him, Jesus uses the word sent about himself 5 times. The Father who sent me, the one who sent me, he who sent me, etc. He leaves the temple courts as they try to stone him, and then the evidence that he is sent happens in chapter 9, perhaps on his way back down from the temple towards the Pool of Siloam. So is the name Siloam symbolic? Yes. Does it take away the historical accuracy of the event at the Pool of Siloam? No. But thankfully, this thin argument no longer holds water. See the pun I made there? I mean, even before we found the Pool of Siloam, it was mentioned as the Fountain of Siloam by 1st century Jewish historian Josephus. And the original Pool of Siloam is mentioned in the Old Testament. King Hezekiah's tunnel that was built to divert water out of the grasp of the Assyrians traveled south down to the Pool of Siloam. And we have evidence that the Hezekiah tunnel, found in 1838 by Edward Robinson, was actually from the time of Hezekiah as well, from this inscription then found in 1880 by Conrad Schick's 16-year-old pupil. Remember, Conrad discovered the Bethesda pool. This is his pupil, Jacob Eliyahu. And this inscription's writing, dating to 8th century BC, mentions connecting the spring to the pool as well. And you can now see it at the Istanbul Archaeology Museum. So at this point, we already have historian Josephus's mention and the Siloam inscription as evidence. And then, in the 1890s, F.J. Bliss and A.C. Dickey were the first to uncover some of the Pool of Siloam steps. In the 1960s, Kathleen Kenyon found more. And then in 2004, a sewage line burst, and in the cleanup, they found even more steps. So at this point, they now had exposed steps on the northern and some of the eastern side of the pool, but it was only a tiny fraction of the entire pool. Much of the land for the pool in 2004 was owned by the Greek Orthodox Church. And it wasn't until this year, with an ownership change, we finally have an active dig to uncover the entirety of the Pool of Siloam. The pool is about 1.25 acres, or 2 Olympic-sized pools, which sounds enormous for a mikvah, but for good reason. Josephus said 2 to 3 million Jews would make the trip to Jerusalem 3 times a year for the major festivals. So a pool this large would be needed for them all to be ritually cleansed before entering the temple. Because of the pool's enormous size, it's going to take some time to fully excavate. But they say in a few years, not only will you be able to see the entirety of the pool, but also the 2,000-year-old pilgrimage road steps they are excavating that start at the Pool of Siloam and ascend upward to the temple, ending at the western wall, which makes this road about 2,000 feet long. Artifacts like coins, tools, and pottery from the pool and the pilgrimage road have been found and date to 1st century Jerusalem. So we know we are in the right place and that the writer of John was an eyewitness to these places that existed before the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. As Jesus used the blind man's healing at the Pool of Siloam as evidence that he was sent by God, so too are we now using these places of healing as evidence of the authenticity of these accounts. And as those unbelieving scholars who dismissed the Gospel of John over never having found the Pool of Siloam learned in the end, so over time we all learn as well that the absence of something is not always evidence that it never existed. It may be purely laying in wait for us to unearth the truth. Sounds like faith. That's all for today. And until next time, keep searching honestly.
I know that we may still disagree, but search honestly. Search honestly.